The starship's silent judge hung in the void, a dark shape against the swirling blue and green marble of the human world. Inside, the Veln collective reached a conclusion. Their decision was not born of emotion, for they had little. It was born of cold, clear logic. For 1,000 cycles, the Veln had been the gardeners of this part of the galaxy. Their purpose was simple: to maintain balance. Any species that reached a certain peak of violent expansion, that showed a pattern of unchecked predation, was to be culled. It was a mercy, they believed, to the galaxy and to the species themselves, preventing the inevitable collapse that came with such brutality. The human data was clear, too clear. Their history was a continuous scroll of conflict. Tribe against tribe, nation against nation, ideology against ideology. They fought over land, over resources, over ideas. They created tools of hunting, then turned those same tools upon themselves with terrifying efficiency. Their planet bore the scars of their wars. To the Veln logic mind, humanity was a textbook case. A predator that had turned its fangs inward. It had peaked. The time for pruning had come. On a space station orbiting a nearby gas giant, Taishin of the Galactic Accord watched the Veln fleet with growing dread. His people, the Kale, had joined the Accord centuries ago. They understood the Veln's purpose, though they did not like it. The Accord's rule was strict: no interference in a judgment. But Taishin had studied the humans. He had been their liaison during their rushed, chaotic application to the Accord. He had read not just the summaries of their wars, but the strange, illogical things that happened in between them. He had seen their art, their music, their stories of monsters and heroes. He felt a cold certainty forming in his gut. He accessed the tight beam communication channel. His 4 long fingers trembled over the console. He sent the official, highest priority missive directly to the Veln High Swarm, * to the Veln Collective. This is Ambassador Taishin of the Galactic Accord, Sector 7. You are about to engage the species designated human of planet Earth. I must urge you in the strongest terms: do not assault the humans. Your parameters for judgment are flawed. They are not what your initial analysis believes. They are not a simple predator species. Please, await further data. The reply was swift. It was not from the High Swarm, but from the lead inquisitor aboard the Silent Judge.
Ambassador Taishin.
Your emotional attachment to a client species is noted. The data is unambiguous. Their biological drive for conflict is their dominant trait. Their planet's ecosystem shows repeated patterns of domination and collapse triggered by this trait. The judgment is logical. The culling will proceed. Do not contact us again. The channel went dead. Taishin stared at the screen, his heart sinking. They saw the fire, but they did not feel its heat. They saw the bullet, but did not hear the gunshot. They read the history of violence, but could not read the subtext of sheer, stubborn survival that was written between every line of blood. On Earth, the warning came too late. The global networks, always humming with a low level of chaotic information, flared with panic. Then, just as quickly, the panic was buried under layers of protocol. In a deep orbital monitoring station, Myri Park looked at her screens. She was not a soldier. She was a systems engineer. Her world was one of wires, codes, and power flows. The alien signatures appearing in high orbit were just another system error to be managed, albeit on a planetary scale. Her hands moved automatically, her face calm. She began rerouting communications, not through the standard military channels, but through a labyrinth of civilian satellites and buried cables. She wasn't thinking about fighting back yet. She was thinking about keeping the lights on, keeping the data flowing. On the ground, in a reinforced conference room that was now a bunker, J. Kim watched the live feed from orbit. His colleagues were shouting, some crying. He remained quiet. His specialty was xenobiology, understanding how life forms think. He looked at the sleek, insect-like designs of the Veln ships. He saw their perfect formation, their simultaneous movements. A hive mind, a collective consciousness. They would think as one. They would decide as one. They would, therefore, have a single point of failure. He turned to a stunned general. They will hit a major population center first. to create maximum psychological shock and disable command. Probably Tokyo, Shanghai, or New York. Above them, the Veln ships moved. Their target was selected. A massive, glowing sprawl on the eastern coast of the largest continent. A nexus of energy, movement, and life. The perfect target to break a species' spirit. They did not know it was called the Beijing metropolitan area. They simply saw a dense cluster of what they assumed was the human hive. Weapons glowed on the underbelly of the silent judge. The culling began. Down on the blue-green marble, alarms screamed. But in the silence between the sirens, a different kind of signal was being passed. Not a scream, but a question. Problem had been presented. And across the planet, in bunkers, in offices, in apartments, and in fields, the human mind, in all its fragmented, individual, brilliant, and terrible glory, began to work on the solution. They did not know they were being judged as predators. They only knew they were being attacked. And for humanity, those two things had always required very different answers. The sky above the great city turned from blue to a sickly orange. It was not fire. It was the light of the Veln's primary energy weapon, a beam designed to break apart structures at a molecular level with a terrible quietness. The beam struck the heart of the city. Buildings that had stood for decades dissolved into clouds of gray dust, falling in silent, slow-motion waves on the bridge of the silent judge. The Inquisitor observed. The collective mind felt the familiar pattern. First, the shock, then the screaming, then the chaotic, angry retaliation. They monitored the global human networks, waiting for the storm of panic to flood every channel. The storm did not come. Instead, the data streams became orderly. Emergency protocols with names like Black Swan and Dragon Breach were activated. The shouting voices on public channels were quickly overridden by calm, coded signals on encrypted military bands. The initial loss of life was horrific, but the numbers scrolling on the Veln screens were far, far lower than their projections. By 70%. The Inquisitor felt a ripple of confusion in the collective. It accessed the target analysis. The city was a Class 12 population hub, the highest density. The energy signature was immense. Life signs were everywhere. The strike should have eliminated 16 million units and crippled the regional government. A secondary scan filtered through the settling dust. The truth began to resolve. The dense city center was filled with automated manufacturing plants. The energy signature was from non-stop industrial activity. The life signs were a mistake. The Veln scanners had counted high heat signatures from machinery as biological life. The actual residential zones were more spread out, buried under layers of concrete and earth, shielded. The strike had hit the body, but missed the heart and the brain. On the orbital defense platform designated Guardian 12, Myri Park coughed in the smoke. Alarms blared. A section of the station was open to vacuum, sealed off by emergency doors. Her screens flashed with damage reports. But her main console, the one tied into the planetary power grid, was still alive. She did not try to fire the platform's broken guns. Instead, her fingers flew across the keyboard. She thought in pathways and currents. The Veln ships were like stones thrown into a pond. She could not fight the stones, but she could change the water. She initiated the Labyrinth Protocol. It was a last-ditch theoretical design for electronic warfare. It did not attack. It hid, and it cheated. Across the continent, giant power grids began to shut down in a controlled sequence. Whole countries went dark. But the darkness was a trick. Myri rerouted the immense power into a few specific, hardened underground lines. She then fed that stolen power into thousands of civilian satellite dishes, radar towers, and even old radio antennas. The Veln sensors. The planet's surface suddenly became a mirror made of noise. Their targeting systems saw 100 false energy signatures flaring to life, each looking like a military base powering up. Their scans for leadership signals bounced off the chaotic radio waves Myri was pumping into the atmosphere. One moment, their scanners showed a clear target. The next, it was gone, replaced by 5 false ones. A flight of Veln hunter drones, small and fast, descended towards a location in Siberia where a powerful signal had just appeared. As they entered the atmosphere, Myri cut the power to that specific signal. At the exact same moment, she flooded a different array in northern Canada with power. The drones swerved, confused. The collective mind hesitated, processing the contradiction. On the ground, J. Kim was in a speeding armored vehicle, heading away from the chaos. His communicator buzzed with updates. He heard of the strange sensor ghosts confusing the enemy. He saw the reports of the first disorganized human counterattacks. Old jet fighters rose and were swatted from the sky by superior Velen technology. Mobile missile launchers fired, and their rockets detonated harmlessly against energy shields. On the Galactic Accord Station, Taishin watched the disaster unfold with a heavy heart. The live feeds showed the Velen fleet, pristine and untouchable, while human defenses crumbled. It was a brutal, clinical demonstration of power. But his eyes were not on the explosions. They were on the data flowing in the margins. He called for Era Song. She arrived, her usually calm face tight with stress. She was a historian, her expertise in the rise and fall of civilizations. She had helped process the vast archives Earth had submitted for its membership review. The Velen see only the violence, Taishin said, his voice low. They see the wars, the weapons, the death counts. They think that is the whole story.
Aira nodded slowly.
It is the loudest chapter, but not the only one. Look deeper, Taishin urged, pointing to the secure data stream from Earth. Look at what happens after. The Velen believe a species' peak aggression is its end point. For humans, it is just a phase, a terrible, bloody phase that they seem to require before they find a new solution. Era went to her console. She bypassed the military summaries and went straight to the raw historical records. She pulled up a document tagged 1648 Treaty of Westphalia. It was not a record of a battle, but of a peace. A peace that ended 30 years of horrific, continent-wide war, not by one side crushing the other, but by creating a new idea, the sovereign state. It was a messy, illogical system to end the bleeding. Next, she looked at the period following 1945 CE. The war had been apocalyptic in scale. The Velen analysis would have marked that as the final, peak violence. But Era saw what came next. The victors did not simply carve up the world. They built fragile, talking shop organizations. They poured resources into their defeated enemies, not out of kindness, but out of a cold understanding that a starving, angry population would just become the next war. They created a Cold War, a standoff so terrifying it forced a tense, nervous peace for decades. They don't just stop fighting when they win, Era whispered, her eyes widening. They create systems, however flawed, to prevent the next fight. They are not driven by the desire to conquer. They are driven by the desire to end the problem. She pulled up another file.
1962 CE, Cuban Missile Crisis.
She read the tense communications, the 13 days where the world stood on the edge of final war. The Velen would see two predators snarling, ready to strike. Era saw the opposite. She saw leaders, terrified of the tool they had built, pulling back at the last second. They established a direct phone line afterward, not to celebrate victory, but to make sure they never came that close to mutual destruction again. It's a pattern, she said, turning to Taishin. A terrible, wasteful, brilliant pattern. Every time they face ultimate pressure, every time they look into the abyss of their own extinction, they do not simply fight harder. They innovate. They create a new rule, a new technology, a new line of communication. They learn. And the lesson sticks. Taishin felt a chill. So their wars are not displays of dominance? No, Era said, her voice firm with realization. They are brutal, bloody experiments. Each one is a test of a new strategy, a new technology, a new social idea. The cost is unimaginable. But the data they gather, it is permanent. They don't just remember the defeat. They engineer a future where that specific defeat is impossible. On the screen, they watched a new human tactic. Small, fast boats, not military craft but modified civilian vessels, swarmed around a Velen ship that had descended too low over an ocean. They were firing nothing but dense clouds of chaff and smoke, simple radar-confusing material. It was a nuisance like flies bothering a giant. The Veln ship ignored them, focusing on a larger military target inland. But then, hidden in the chaff cloud, an old submarine broke the surface for 3 seconds. It launched a single missile not at the ship's shields, but at the water directly beneath its gravity engines. The sub disappeared immediately. The missile was not a nuke. It was a massive, shaped explosive charge. It detonated under the water. The effect was not to damage the ship, but to create a sudden, massive cavity in the water, a temporary hole. The Veln ship, relying on gravitational stability, lurched. Its main weapon fired wildly into the sky, missing its target completely. It was a ridiculously complex, risky plan for a mere distraction. It used outdated weapons, civilian tools, and precise timing. It had no military value in the traditional sense. It simply solved a very specific, 1-minute problem. Stopping one shot from one ship. Shin pointed a shaking finger at the screen. That is not a predator. A predator would have thrown more teeth at the problem. It would have sacrificed more of the small boats in a direct attack. This is a workaround. Era looked from the historical files to the live battle. The connection was clear and terrifying. The humans were not fighting a war the way the Veln understood war. They were troubleshooting an existential threat. They were running every possible solution, no matter how crazy, and learning from the failures in real time. She turned to Taishin, her face pale. They don't fight to win territory or resources from the Veln. They are fighting to understand the Veln, to solve them. And once they have a solution, she trailed off, the implication hanging in the air. Taishin finished the terrible thought, echoing his own earlier, ignored warning. They will implement it. Permanently. The village was a quiet, forgotten place in the mountains. It was where Jae Kim had been sent when the war began, a place deemed safe due to its lack of strategic value. He had spent the days watching the sky, listening to the fragmented reports on an old radio. The fear was a cold stone in his stomach, but his mind kept working, turning the problem over and over. The Veln found him anyway. It was not a full attack. It was a scout party, 3 sleek, silver drones the size of large dogs, moving with silent, insect-like precision. They surrounded the small wooden house. A beam cut through the door, not burning it, but causing the wood to fall apart into dust. Jay stood still in the middle of the main room, his hands open at his sides. A drone extended a needle-like probe. It did not speak. It simply injected a chemical cocktail into his neck. It was not meant to harm him. It was a truth serum, a fear enhancer. The Veln wanted data. They wanted to record the primal terror of a prey species facing its end. They wanted to broadcast his screams back to their collective, to solidify their understanding of humanity. Jay felt the cold liquid enter his vein. He waited for the panic to rise. Instead, a strange calm settled over him. The biologist in him observed the effects. His heart rate increased. His senses sharpened. But the emotional storm, the blind animal fear, did not come. He was afraid, yes, but it was a clear, sharp fear. A data point. The drone projected a hologram in front of him. It showed the attack on the city, the dissolving buildings, the numbers of the dead. It was meant to overwhelm him with grief and horror. Jay watched. He noted the precision of the beam. He noted the dustfall pattern. He estimated the energy output. His mind, trained to observe life, was now observing death with the same detached curiosity. "You are afraid," a synthesized voice said from the drone. It was not a question. It was a statement based on his physiological readings. "I am," Jay said, his voice steady. "It is logical to fear death. You are a predator," the voice stated. "Your history is one of violence. You have peaked. This is the logical end." Jay almost smiled. A small, sad smile. "You are making a category error." The drones froze for a second. The statement did not compute. "You think we are a predator species," Jay continued, his eyes moving from one drone to the next, studying their design, their placement. "We are not." The lead drone's probe glowed slightly. "Your biological and historical data is clear. You see the teeth, but not the reason for the teeth," Jay said. The serum was making him talkative, But it was not forcing out secrets. It was forcing out truth. A wolf hunts to eat, to live. It is a pure predator. What do you think we have been hunting all this time? Each other. He took a slow step forward. The drones did not stop him. They were collecting. We were not hunting each other. We were hunting solutions. We were hunting for safety, for stability, for a way to make the hunger, the cold, the danger go away forever. We turned on each other when resources were scarce, yes. But that was a failure of the hunt. A mistake. The hologram changed, showing ancient human wars, then modern ones. You see this as a straight line of aggression. It is not. It is a spiral of trial and error. Each war was an attempt to solve a problem: land, faith, power, with the only tool we thought we had: violence. And each time we learned that tool was imperfect. So we tried to build a better one. Laws, treaties, borders. You are explaining your violence, not denying it. The voice replied, I am explaining our purpose, Jay said, his voice growing stronger. We are not predators. We are a pest species. The word hung in the dusty air. It was a simple, ugly word. Pests do not hunt for food. They simply exist. They spread. They consume. And when you try to exterminate them, they do not fight fair. They hide. They adapt. They eat the poison and become immune. They find the cracks in your walls. They survive. He looked directly at the drone sensor. You have not come to fight a war. You have come to exterminate a pest. And we have been practicing survival against extermination since the first winter, since the first plague, since the first time one tribe tried to wipe out another. He saw a slight tremor in the drone's hovering field, a flicker in the hologram. The collective mind was processing. It was analyzing the new category: pest, not prey, not predator. Pest.it was a profound shift in definition. A pest was not culled for the sake of balance. A pest was removed for the sake of cleanliness. And a pest that knew it was being exterminated was the most dangerous kind. You are alone. You are weak. Your technology is primitive, the voice stated, but it now sounded like it was reciting facts, not conclusions. I am not alone, Jay said softly. He tapped the side of his own head. You are a hive. You think together. That is your strength. It is also your weakness. You have one mind. We have 8 billion. You have just shown one of those 8 billion what you are. And he has been studying you. He had seen it. The slight delay after his unexpected statements. The way all 3 drones moved in perfect unison. A single mind controlling multiple bodies. A single point of failure.at that moment, a low whine built outside. It was not the sound of a ship. It was the sound of old artillery shells, fired from howitzers hidden in the next valley. Jay's locator beacon had been silently transmitting not just his position, but the precise distance and bearing to the drones based on their own energy signatures. The Velen scout drones detected the incoming projectiles. They calculated the impact. They could have dodged. But for a split second, the collective mind hesitated. It was still analyzing the new data: pest species, survival through adaptation, 8 billion individual minds. The hesitation was a fraction of a second too long. The first shell landed 30 meters away, shaking the ground. The second landed directly on the house. Jay was already moving, throwing himself into the small root cellar. The world above him exploded in noise and light. When the dust settled, the drones were gone, shattered into scrap metal. Jay climbed out, covered in dirt but unharmed. He looked at the burning wreckage, then up at the sky where the Velen fleet still loomed. That he had sent them a message. Not with a weapon, but with words. He had given their single, logical mind a paradox to chew on. And in a war of adaptation, a paradox was more dangerous than any bomb. The hunt for a solution was on. And the humans had just identified the first variable. The enemy's mind was slow because it had to agree with itself. Ours, Jay thought, does not. And that might be the only advantage we need. The command chamber of the silent judge was quiet. The only sounds were the low hum of the ship and the soft chime of incoming data. The Inquisitor floated in its support harness, connected directly to the collective mind. But for the first time in its long existence, the flow of thought was not smooth. It was jagged, confused. The data from the scout drone's final moments had been fragmented, but the audio was clear. The human's words were a virus in the system. Category error. Pest species. Survival against extermination. The concepts did not fit. They warped the edges of the Veln's perfect logical model. A new signal was received. It was from the Galactic Accord Station. Ambassador Taishin and historian Erasong requested an emergency audience. The collective, seeking clarity, allowed it. Their faces appeared on the main screen. "You must break off the attack," Taishin said, his voice urgent but calm. "You are operating on incomplete data. The data on human violence is extensive." The Inquisitor's synthesized voice replied. "It is not about the violence," Erasong interrupted. She held up a data slate. "It is about what the violence means to them. You see it as an endpoint. We have analyzed their history. For them it is a tool. A terrible tool they use to solve a problem, and then they try to throw the tool away." She began to transmit files. Not battle summaries, but peace treaties, reconstruction plans, medical research notes from post-war periods, diagrams of the MAD doctrine, mutual assured destruction, which was not a plan for war, but a terrifying theory for preventing it. "You came here to cull a predator that had reached its peak," Era explained. "But humanity does not have a peak. They have a cycle. Crisis, violence, adaptation, stability. Then a new crisis. They are not hunting for food or territory. They are on what they call an endless hunt. But the hunt is not for other creatures." Taishin leaned forward. "The hunt is for safety, for permanence, for a final solution to whatever is threatening them. You are not their prey. You are the latest threat, and they have just classified you as an existential threat." On a secondary screen, live battle data streamed. The Inquisitor watched, now with the new framework. It saw the human actions not as attacks, but as experiments. A squadron of human drones, cheap and disposable, flew in a messy pattern towards a Veln energy shield. They were not firing. They were each carrying a different type of material: a chunk of metal, a container of water, a piece of rock. They flew into the shield and were vaporized one by one. The humans were testing how the shield reacted to different substances. They were paying for data with drones. Elsewhere, a Veln patrol ship was lured into a narrow canyon. The humans did not attack it. Instead, they triggered pre-placed explosives to collapse the canyon walls on top of it. The ship's shields held, but it was trapped, buried under millions of tons of rock. It was not destroyed. It was contained, removed from the battle with minimal energy expenditure. A workaround. The Inquisitor felt a cold logic forming, one it did not like. The humans were not trying to win a battle in the traditional sense. They were trying to understand, to disable, and to archive. They were treating the Veln like a dangerous piece of technology to be reverse engineered. Then, the main screen flickered. A new face appeared, replacing Taishin and Era. It was the human from the scout drone footage.
Jae Kimo.
He was in a different location now, a dark room with blinking lights behind him. "Veln Collective," Jay said, his voice calm. "You assessed our capacity for violence. You did not assess our capacity for hate." He paused, letting the word hang. It was an emotional word, illogical. The collective waited. "We do not hate you with a hot rage. That burns out. We hate you with a cold hate. The kind that builds memorials and writes history books. The kind that says never again and means it forever. You are now the subject of that hate. You are the again we will never allow." Behind him, a familiar figure moved into view. Myri Park. She looked tired, but her eyes were focused on a console. She spoke not to the Veln, but to someone off-screen. Her voice was clear over the open channel. "Jump drive adaptation complete. Signal lock confirmed. We have their hive world coordinates." The transmission ended. Silence filled the silent judge. The words echoed in the collective mind. Hate. Never again. Hive world coordinates. The realization was a slow, cold wave crashing over the Inquisitor. The human had not been making a threat. He had been stating a fact. This was not a war for survival anymore. Survival implied a return to how things were before. The humans had moved past that. They had accepted the war as a fact. Now they were working on the next step, making sure it could never, ever happen again. And to do that, they needed to understand the enemy completely. Then they needed to remove the enemy completely. They had not just reverse-engineered the jump drive. They had turned it into a targeting system. They were no longer just defending. They were planning a counterstrike. Not for conquest, for eradication. The Inquisitor finally understood the humans' endless hunt. The hunt was for total security, for absolute safety, and the only way to achieve that in their brutal, logical, illogical minds was to eliminate any threat at its source, permanently. The culling had failed. Instead, the Velen had given humanity a new, universal problem to solve, the Velen themselves. And humanity was now deploying its oldest, most terrible skill. They were engineering a final solution. Too late, the Velen Collective realized the true nature of the species they had awakened. They were not predators to be put down. They were engineers of oblivion. The Velen Collective mind was a fortress of logic. It understood direct force. It understood retreat. It understood negotiation based on clear advantage. It did not understand what was happening now. The human resistance had changed. It was no longer a military action. It had become something else. Something corrosive. A Velen supply ship, moving through the darkness between planets, detected a distress call. It was a perfect copy of a Velen emergency signal. The ship altered course to investigate. It found not a damaged vessel, but a small, silent human probe. As the supply ship drew near, the probe activated. It did not fire a weapon. It broadcast a signal. It was a compressed data burst. When the Velen computers unpacked it, they found thousands of hours of human video files. They were not military codes or propaganda. They were horror movies. Old, grainy films filled with monsters, ghosts, and irrational fears. The stories were illogical, the terrors impossible. But they were filled with screams, with disturbing images, with a sense of dread that bypassed reason. The Velen collective mind, trying to analyze the data for tactical value, was forced to process it. The unsettling, chaotic emotions embedded in the stories seeped into the edges of the hive consciousness like a stain. Caused no damage, but it was distracting. Unclean. On the ground, the Velen hunter drones swept through a ruined city. Their goal was to find hidden command centers. Instead, they were led by false signals into a labyrinth of broken streets. The humans had not set traps with explosives. They had set traps with environment. One drone unit was lured into the vast, dark basement of a collapsed hospital. The humans had switched off all power and released stored medical waste into the air. The biological contamination was harmless to the drones, but the thick, foul-smelling mist clogged their sensors. They became blind, cut off from the collective's clear data stream, forced to rely on their own limited AI. They experienced, for the first time, something like loneliness. Another patrol was guided into the heart of an active volcanic zone. The heat was not enough to melt them, but the constant seismic shocks and choking sulfur clouds disrupted their communications. The humans, wearing protective suits, watched from a distance. They were not attacking. They were observing how the drones reacted to the planet's natural chaos. They were taking notes. The Inquisitor received reports of drones returning from missions with corrupted data. Some repeated nonsense phrases they had picked up from human radio broadcasts. Others moved with a slight hesitation, as if the collective's instructions were unclear. The hive mind was being poisoned not by a weapon, but by context, a context it was not built to understand. Worse were the direct engagements. When human soldiers fought now, they did not aim for kills. They aimed for captures. A small, fast vehicle would race in, firing nets of strong, sticky polymer instead of bullets. A trapped drone would be dragged away at high speed before it could self-destruct. The Velen would feel that part of the collective mind vanish, not in a flash of destruction, but into silence. It was not death. It was kidnapping. The humans were dissecting their technology, their communication, their very thought processes. Every captured drone, every corrupted signal, every confusing encounter was a piece of the puzzle being fed into the vast, distributed human network. Myrie Park, in a deep underground complex, looked at a wall of screens. On one, a team of engineers was taking apart a Veln energy cell. On another, linguists and programmers were mapping the structure of the collective's command signals, not to block them, but to imitate them. On a third, psychologists and game theorists were building a model of the hive mind's decision tree. They need consensus, Myrie said to a colonel beside her. Even if it's fast, it's still a process. They have to agree. We don't. She pointed to a simulation running on her main console. It showed a Veln ship being given two conflicting orders at once from what appeared to be legitimate sources. In the simulation, the ship froze, unable to compute the contradiction. We can give them problems that have no right answer. They'll stall. Above Earth, the Veln fleet still held orbit. They were powerful. They were undefeated in battle. But they were losing the war. The clean, logical victory they sought was gone. The humans had turned the planet itself into a weapon of confusion. They had turned captured technology into a key. They had turned the Veln's own need for order into a weakness. The Inquisitor felt the collective's certainty crumbling. They had come to face a beast, a predator they could outthink and outfight. But they were not fighting a beast. They were fighting a disease that learned, that adapted, that used your own body against you. A new signal pierced the chaos. It was a simple, repeating message on all major human frequencies, broadcast in clear, unencoded basic galactic. It was the voice of J. Kim. You came for a clean fight. We do not offer one. You came for a logical conclusion. We defy logic. You can destroy our cities. You can kill millions. But you cannot kill an idea. The idea is this: you are a problem. And we will solve you. The message ended. In the silence that followed, the Inquisitor felt the final, chilling understanding. The humans were not trying to win a war. They were trying to cure an infection. And the Veln were the infection. In the human mind, there was only one way to deal with a resistant, adaptable existential infection: total sterilization. The bridge of the silent judge was no longer a place of quiet purpose. The air felt heavy. The lights seemed dimmer. The constant, silent flow of data through the collective mind was now a turbulent river, clogged with human chaos, nonsense signals, corrupted codes, and the echoing, illogical words. Pest. Problem. Never again. The Inquisitor floated, connected to the hive, and felt the paralysis spreading. Every military option was clear. They could glass the planet. They could unleash planet-killer weapons. They had the power to turn Earth into a smoking cinder. But the logic was broken. If humans were predators, a decisive, overwhelming blow would end it. They would break. But pests did not break. Pests survived in the ashes. If you burned the house down to kill the termites, they would be in the charred wood, already adapting. If humans were solving a problem, then violence was just more data. More data on Veln capabilities. More motivation for their terrible, cold hate. Killing millions would not end the hunt. It would just add more names to the memorial. More fuel for the never again. The collective could not find a clean path. Every simulation ended in a contradiction. Destroying humanity seemed to guarantee their ultimate, scattered, vengeful survival. Leaving meant admitting failure and allowing a species that now possessed their hive world coordinates to live. Containing them was impossible. They had already proven they could turn containment into a research opportunity. They were stuck. And being stuck was a form of dying for a mind that lived on decisive action. On the main screen, a new connection forced itself open. It was the human J. Kim. He was not in a bunker now. He stood on a rocky plain, the wind pulling at his clothes. The sky behind him was streaked with the trails of distant ships. He looked tired, but his eyes were calm and clear. "You are realizing it now," he said without greeting. "There is no victory for you here. We have the power to erase your world." The Inquisitor's voice replied, the tone flat. "You do?" Jay nodded. "And then what?" You think we have not sent our knowledge out? Seed ships? Data streams bouncing between dead probes? You think the few who might be off-world, or in deep bunkers you missed, will forget? You will have solved nothing. You will have only made the problem angrier, and given it forever to work on a solution. He took a step closer to the screen, as if looking directly at the Inquisitor. You came to judge us, to cull us, but you made a fatal error. You assaulted us. You made it personal. You moved yourself from being a natural disaster in our eyes to being an enemy. And an enemy is something we can understand, something we can fix. On a secondary screen, data scrolled. It was the targeting solution Myri Park had mentioned. It was not just a set of coordinates. It was a full plan, a way to use a captured Veln jump drive to send a package not just to their homeworld, but directly into the heart of their primary communication nexus. The package was not a bomb. It was a data virus, a cocktail of everything the humans had learned. Their own horror, their history of war and peace, the concept of never again, and the cold, simple message that Earth was now a quarantine zone. Any Veln signal entering it would be infected, turned into noise, and sent back. It was a digital fence. A forever warning. You have two choices, Jay said, his voice soft but firm. You can spend your strength killing us, and in doing so, you will create a ghost that will haunt you to the end of time. A ghost that learns and remembers and waits. Or you can leave, and we will let you leave. The Inquisitor felt the collective ripple with outrage. Let them leave? It was an insult. This is not mercy, Jay said, as if hearing the thought. It is logic. Our logic. You leave and you never return. You tell every other species you meet to never approach our world. You make Earth a story, a warning in your own histories. You mark this sector as cursed. In return, we do not send our solution to your home. We contain the problem. Right here. He spread his hands, indicating the planet. This is the price of your assault. You do not get to win. You only get to choose how you lose. You can lose by creating an eternal enemy. Or you can lose by leaving, and living with the knowledge that you awoke something that even you, in all your cold logic, could not bring yourself to face again. The silence on the Veln bridge was absolute. It was the silence of a mind confronted with a puzzle that had no correct answer. Problem with no clean solution. It was the very thing they had sought to eliminate in the galaxy. They had seen humanity's violence as the peak. They were wrong. This was the peak. This terrible, calm offer. This was not the roar of a predator. It was the quiet click of a lock turning forever. It was the sound of a door being sealed. The Inquisitor, for the first time, made a decision not from pure logic, but from something colder, the calculation of infinite loss. To fight was to lose forever. To retreat was to lose now. The Veln fleet began to move, not forward but away. The ships turned, their weapons powering down. They pulled back from orbit, gathering into their formation. They did not send a reply. There was nothing to say. The message was sent in their retreat. On the rocky plain, Jay Kim watched the dark shapes diminish against the stars. He felt no triumph, only a deep, cold sorrow. The problem was solved. The threat was contained. It was the human way. Above him, in the command centers and the dusty bases, no one cheered. They watched. They tracked. They made sure the Veln kept going. Myri Park's finger hovered over the button that would send the data virus. She would hover over it for a long, long time. The Veln had come to teach a lesson about balance. They had learned one instead. Some species cannot be culled. Some fires cannot be put out. You can only walk away and hope the wind never blows the sparks in your direction again. Too late, they realized what they had truly awakened. Not monsters, not predators, but gardeners of a different kind. And humanity had just decided to weed their galaxy.